Somhairle.Aonghus Mór. Domhnall was a leading figure in the 13th-century kingdoms of the Isles and Scotland. He was a son of Domhnall mac Raghnaill, the eponym of Clann Domhnaill, a branch of Clann Somhairle.Aonghus Mór. Appears to have succeeded his father in the mid-part of the 13th century. At the time, the rulers of the Isles were fiercely independent of the Scottish Crown, and owed nominal allegiance to the distant Norwegian Crown. Aonghus Mór's first certain appearance in the historical record seems to evince his involvement in aiding native Irish kindreds against the consolidation of Anglo-Irish authority in the Northwest Island. Such cooperation could have been undertaken in the context of overseas kindreds like Clann Domhnaill constructing Irish alliances to gain assistance against Scottish encroachment. Scottish aggression against the Isles seems to have precipitated the Norwegian Crown's campaign against the Scots in 1263. Like other leading members of Clann Somhairle.Aonghus Mór supported the Norwegian cause against Alexander III, King of Scotland. However, the fact that Håkon Håkonsson, King of Norway, had to force Aonghus Mór's submission suggests that his support was rendered somewhat grudgingly. Nevertheless, the Norwegian campaign was ultimately a failure, and the Islesmen were compelled to submit to the Scots after a retaliatory campaign the following year. As for Aonghus Mór, he was forced to hand over his son, likely Alasdair Og, as a hostage of the Scottish Crown. By 1266, the Isles were officially annexed by the Scots. In the decades that followed, Aonghus Mór and his clan Somhairle kinsmen integrated themselves into the Scottish realm. For example, Aonghus Mór was one of 3 members of the kindred who attended an important government council at Scone in which Alexander III's granddaughter, Margaret, was recognized as the king's rightful heir. Following Alexander III's unexpected death 2 years later, Aonghus Mór and Alasdair Og were signatories of the Turnberry Ban, a pact between several Scottish and Anglo-Irish magnates. One aspect of this bond may have concerned the continued resistance to Anglo-Irish domination in Northwest Ireland. This could indicate that Aonghus Mór was made a party to the pact as a means of limiting his kindred's support of the native opponents of the Anglo-Irish. Whatever the case, Aonghus Mór died in about 1293, and was succeeded by Alasdair Og as Lord of Islay. Aonghus Mór was married to a member of the Somhairle kindred. Besides Alasdair Og, Aonghus Mór had 2 sons, Aonghus Og and Owen Sprangach. He also had a daughter who married Domhnall Og o Domhnall, King of Tyrconnell. Clann Domhnaill. Aonghus Mór was a son of Domhnall mac Raghnaill, eponym of Clann Domhnaill. As such, Aonghus Mór can be regarded as the first mac Domhnaill. Clann Domhnaill was the junior-most of 3 main branches of Clann Somhairle. The other 2 branches were Clann Domhnaill and Clann Ruairi, respectively descended from Domhnaill mac Somhairle and Ruairi mac Raghnaill. According to oral tradition dating to the 18th century, Aonghus Mór was fostered by the eponymous ancestor of Clann Domhnaill. The date of Domhnall's death and Aonghus Mór's succession is unknown, although the latter was certainly representing the family by 1260s, seemingly indicating that the former was dead or retired by this time. Aonghus Mór was married to a member of the Somhairle kindred. According to early modern tradition preserved by the history of the MacDonalds, she was a daughter of Clann Mór Somhairle, a leading member of the Somhairle, and the mother of Aonghus Mór's younger son, Aonghus Og. Like his Clann Somhairle kinsman Owen mac Domhnaill, Aonghus Mór evidently named his firstborn son, Alasdair Og, after Alexander III, King of Scotland. The kindred's adoption of this royal name appears to be indicative of the spread of Scottish influence into Isles, and could be evidence of the kindred's attempt to align itself closer to the Scottish Crown. Certainly, Clann Somhairle's employment of the name contrasts contrasts the continued preference of Scandinavian names borne by the neighbouring Crovan dynasty, a family that also held authority along Scotland's western seaboard. Whatever the case, a daughter of Aonghus Mór married Domhnall Domhnaill, king of Tyrconnell, whilst Alasdair Og was certainly the ancestor of later Clann Domhnaill Galloglass families in Ireland. He may well have been the eponymous ancestor of Clann Alasdair in Kintyre. Another son, Owen Sprangark, was the ancestor of the Ardnimmerken branch of Clann Domhnaill. There is evidence to suggest that Aonghus Mór may have had yet another son named Domhnall, although various historical records and chronicle accounts concerning the period make note of this man, with some of these sources styling him of Islay. The precise identity of this individual is uncertain. Early career, attestations of uncertain date. Unlike some of his Clann Somhairle kinsmen, there is little known of Aonghus Mór's career. Details of his father's life are even more obscure. One source that may cast light upon the latter and potentially concern Aonghus Mór himself is the Chronicle of Man. According to this source, an aged chieftain named Domhnall was held in high esteem by Harald Olafsson, king of Man and the Isles. But after the latter's unexpected death, and the subsequent assassination of his brother Ronvald Olafsson, the kingship was seized by the rival kinsman Harald Guthrothsson, who in turn had Domhnall and his infant son imprisoned. The episode concerning Domhnall concludes with him and his son successfully escaping the captors through divine intervention, and the compiler of the chronicle stating that the recorded events were provided in person by the chieftain in question. There is reason to suspect that Domhnall and his infant son are identical to Domhnall and possibly Aonghus Mór himself. Harald Olafsson certainly associated himself with the Hebrides throughout his reign, a fact which could in turn indicate that the chieftains whom he had held in highest esteem were indeed Hebrideans. There are several charters that may have bearing upon Aonghus Mór's early career. At some point he issued several undated charters to the monastery of Paisley. One of these was a payment and promise of protection to the monks of this religious house, not unlike an earlier grant by his paternal grandfather, Raghnaill mac Somhairle. Aonghus Mór's other charter concerned his grant of the Church of St. Kieran in Kintyre to the monastery. This particular charter refers to both a king and prince named Alexander, although these two can be understood to refer to Alexander II, King of Scotland, and his aforesaid Onan successor, Alexander III, an identification that would date it to 1241 times 1249. Another possibility is that the names instead refer to the latter and his like-named son, Alexander. If this latter identification is indeed correct, the charter would instead date to 1264 times 1284. The grant itself stresses that the transaction was made for the welfare of my Lord Alexander, illustrious King of Scots, a declaration that may be evidence that Aonghus Mór was attempting to align himself with the Scottish Crown. Involvement in Irish affairs. The first certain record of Aonghus Mór in contemporary sources dates to February 1256, when the English Crown commanded that he, and other unnamed men from Scotland, were not to be received in Ireland. In the mid-13th century, leading members of Clann Somhairle were clearly involved in Irish affairs. In 1247, a certain Mac Somhairle was slain whilst resisting an English invasion of Tyrconnell. Domhnall raided Western Ireland and slew the English sheriff of Connacht in 1258. The year after that, a daughter of Domhnaill married Domhnaill, with the latter receiving the bride's tocha of 160 gallo-glass warriors commanded by Domhnaill's brother Aelian. The year before this, Domhnaill had been one of several leading Irishmen who relinquished their claims to the High Kingship of Ireland in favour of Brian O'Neill, King of Tir-O'Hine, a man committed to combating the Anglo-Irish in Ulster. Unfortunately for this group of Irish confederates, the combined forces were utterly crushed by the Anglo-Irish at Downpatrick in 1260, with Brian amongst the slain, whilst the Uí clearly enlisted Hebridean military assistance from Clann Ruairi, with members of the kindred potentially present at the catastrophe at Downpatrick. It is apparent that the Cynniel Conaill also enjoyed connections with Clann Domhnaill, as a daughter of Aonghus Mór is known to have married Domhnall Domhnaill, king of Tir Conaill. A product of this union was Tuatha Domhnaill, a man who is recorded to have seized the kingship of Tir Conaill from his reigning half-brother Aodh, by way of overseas military assistance from Clann Domhnaill in 1290. If Aonghus Mór had been involved with Brian and his insurrection, such a relationship could account for Aonghus Mór being singled out by the aforesaid English Ordinance of 1256. The fact that this directive stated that the Scottish king would name other figures to be denied access to Ireland could indicate that these men were regarded as threats by the Scottish Crown. Such could have been the case if alliances between Irishmen and Islesmen were undertaken in the context of lending mutual assistance to each other. It is conceivable that the overseas support lent to the Irish insurrection was ventured in the context of not only countering the English Crown in Ireland, but of also opposing the westward extension of Scottish royal authority. In fact, another ordinance dating to just weeks before Brian's aforesaid defeat, and almost certainly related to the uprising itself, directed the Anglo-Irish Justicia to arrest any Scottish subjects who were actively seeking confederacies with the Irish that might be to the king's detriment. In the 1230s and 1240s, the Scottish Crown progressively attempted to expand its lordship into Argyll and the Isles. One example of this expansion that appears to have specifically concerned Aonghus Mór was the king's grant of the rights of the Church of Killian to the Diocese of Argyll. Earlier in the century, this church had been under the patronage of Aonghus Mór's aforesaid uncle, Ruairi, and it is likely that Aonghus Mór himself considered its patronage as his own heritable prerogative. A Norwegian subject, Clann Somhairle and the Kingship of the Isles. In 1248, the year after the fall of Mac Somhairle, two leading members of Clann Somhairle travelled to Norway seeking the kingship of the northern Southreya from Haakon Hakonison, King of Norway. The two kinsmen were Owen Mac Domhnaill and Domhnaill Mac Ruairi, chiefs of Clann Domhnaill and Clann Ruairi respectively. Although the entirety of the Southreya roughly encompassed the Hebrides and Man, the precise jurisdiction which Domhnaill and Owen competed for is uncertain. For instance, the northern Hebridean islands of Lewis and Harris and Skye appear to have been held by the Crovan dynasty, then represented by the reigning Harold Olafsson. It is conceivable that Owen and Domhnaill sought kingship over the same jurisdiction that Haakon had awarded to Osbaka Southreiski about a decade before, a region which could have included some or all of the islands possessed by Clann Somhairle. In fact, it is possible that the aforesaid events of 1247 and 1248 were related, and that Domhnaill and Owen sought to succeed Mac Somhairle's position in the Isles. It was only after the unexpected death of Harold Olafsson in 1248 that Haakon sent Owen west oversea to temporarily take up the kingship of the Isles on his behalf. Owen, however, was not only a Norwegian dependent in the Isles, but an eminent Scottish magnate on the mainland. Although the Scottish Crown seems to have attempted to purchase the Isles earlier that decade, Owen's acceptance of Hakon's commission led Alexander II, King of Scotland, to unleash an invasion of Argyll in the summer of 1249, directed at the very heart of the Clann Domhnaill lordship. The unfolding crisis only ended with the Scottish king's untimely death in July 1249. Scottish aggression and Norwegian subjection. About a decade later, the deceased king's son and royal successor, Alexander III, came of age and took steps to continue his father's westward expansion. In 1261, the Scottish Crown sent envoys to Norway offering to purchase the Hebrides from Hakon. Once the Norwegians rejected the offer, the Scots are recorded to have lashed out against the Islesmen in a particularly savage assault upon the inhabitants of Skye. Thus provoked, Hakon assembled an enormous fleet, described by the Icelandic annals as the largest force to have ever set sail from Norway, to reassert Norwegian sovereignty along the north and western coast of Scotland. In July 1263, this armada disembarked from Norway, and by mid-August, Hakon reaffirmed his overlordship in Shetland and Orkney, forced the submission of Caithness, and arrived in the Hebrides. According to Icona Saga Hakonasana, Hakon was met in the region by Magnus Olafsson, King of Man and the Isles, and Domhnaill himself. As the fleet made its way southwards, Hakon sent a detachment of vessels under the command of Domhnaill and Magnus Olafsson to harry Kintyre, whilst Hakon himself made landfall on Gigha. It is evident that Magnus Olafsson and Domhnaill were tasked with bringing Aonghus Mór and Murchard Maxuvni onto the king's side. Poetry embedded within the saga glorifies the subsequent ravaging of Kintyre, and it is likely that it was this rapaciousness which finally persuaded Aonghus Mór and Murchard to come into the king's peace. Certainly the saga reveals that these west coast magnates duly submitted before him, that the king levied a tax of 1,000 head of cattle upon the Kintyremen, and that of certain fortress on the peninsula, most likely Dunaverty Castle, was surrendered to him by an unnamed knight. In early September, Hakon's fleet of Norwegians and Islesmen entered the Firth of Clyde, when negotiations between the Scottish and Norwegian administrations broke down. The saga reveals that Hakon sent a detachment of vessels up into Loch Long, under the command of Magnus Olafsson, Domhnaill, Aonghus Mór, and Murchard. According to various versions of the saga, this contingent consisted of either 40 or 60 ships, a considerable portion of Hakon's total fleet. From Loch Long, the saga reveals that this detachment portaged the approximately a 2.5 kilometers distance between Arica to Tarbet, launched into Loch Lomond, and ravaged the surrounding region of the Lennox. Meanwhile, at the beginning of October, Hakon's main force clashed with the Scots at Lugs, and withdrew into the Hebrides. Once regrouped with a detachment of Islesmen, the saga records that Hakon rewarded his overseas supporters. Since Owen had refused to aid the Norwegians' cause, Domhnaill and Aonghus were awarded his forfeited island territories. A certain Ruthri is stated to have received Bute, whilst Murchard got Arran. Aonghus Mór, who is not identified as one of the beneficiaries, already enjoyed possession of Islay. Although the saga declares the Norwegian campaign to have been a triumph, in reality it was an utter failure. Not only had Hakon failed to break Scottish power, but Alexander III seized the initiative, and oversaw a series of invasions into the Isles and northern Scotland the following year. Recognizing this dramatic shift in royal authority, Magnus Olafsson submitted to Alexander III within the year, and in so doing symbolized the complete collapse of Norwegian sovereignty in the Isles. The Scots' retaliatory campaign against the Islesmen was evidently commanded by Alexander Cummin, Earl of Buchan, William, Earl of Mar, and Alan Hostarius. According to the later chronicler John Forden, it was these magnates who oversaw the Scots ravaging of the islands. This account is corroborated by Magnus' Saga Lagabetes, which states that Scottish forces invaded the Isles in the summer after Hakon's campaign, and forced the submission of Aonghus Mór and other adherents to the Norwegian cause. Evidence from the Scottish Exchequer, concerning the Earl of Mar's reception of monetary aid for commanding 200 sergeants on behalf of the king in the Hebrides, further validates these accounts. Despite these retributory actions, the Scottish Crown was only partially successful in turning Clann Somhairle on side, as Domhnaill stubbornly refused the recognised Scottish overlordship. Nevertheless, in 1266, almost 3 years after Hakon's abortive campaign, terms of peace were finally agreed upon between the Scottish and Norwegian administrations. Specifically, with the conclusion of the Treaty of Perth in July, Hakon's son and successor, Magnus Hakonisson, King of Norway, formally resigned all rights to Man and the islands on the western coast of Scotland. In so doing, the territorial dispute over Scotland's western maritime region was finally settled.